Hi, Dr. Allen. We're so happy to have you here on Valeo's podcast. A lot of people in our community actually told us we should meet you because you were one of the first pioneers that brought sports medicine to Dubai. So, welcome today.
Thank you, Nadine, and lovely to be here with you today. I think we met each other a little while ago and had a great conversation and
Yes, so
decided
we
that
had to share it with
we needed
everybody.
to do it. Yeah.
This was something I always wondered. Like before meeting you, I always thought sports medicine is more, okay, if I'm an athlete or a very active individual. But who actually should think of, okay, I need to go see a sports medicine doctor?
Is a very good question. My previous role was as a team doctor full time for a professional rugby team, so that was dealing with professional elite athletes all the time. But since I moved to Dubai, I always keep explaining sports medicine as sports and exercise medicine because it helps to remember the other side of sports medicine. In fact, one of my professors back in the day said that he thinks that sports medicine as such, sports and exercise medicine's greatest impact in the medical world will come through its encouragement of physical activity for people and how that will help people with chronic diseases of lifestyle, as opposed to just the fancy glamorous side of sports medicine dealing with, elite athletes and professional sports teams. So it's a bit of both. So now in this current role now, it's a sports and exercise medicine. I work in a hospital. We formed the department. And so the patients that we get are a broad variety of patients, from young to old, from physically inactive, funny enough, to super active, and just from recreational athletes to serious recreational athletes, and then through to, professional sportsmen coming in. I think people that find their way to us are coming in mainly because of pain a lot of the time. And that might be because of, I always describe pain as either an injury, you rolled your ankle, or underuse or overuse. And so sometimes you get these repetitive strain injuries or overuse tendinitis as you're doing too much. You've now taken up paddle tennis, you love it, playing it 5 times a week, you weren't doing anything before, and you've ended up with tennis elbow.
It's funny how like underuse is not good, but also overuse
That's
is
the
not good.
thing. So then the underuse side is then maybe not so strong enough around that particular joint because you're not using it as much, and you end up with shoulder pain or back pain or knee pain. And then we tend to encourage more the sort of the physical strengthening side and the stability side of things. And then with the overuse side is always a tricky one because you're now having to deal with people who love what they're doing.
Yeah.
And now you've got to tell them that they need to scale that back. But I think the important thing with sports medicine is that we always want people to carry on doing what they're doing. So we will try to find ways of helping them to continue what they're doing, but in a slightly different form for the moment while we're treating that particular thing, and then phase that particular thing back in.
And they become pain-free.
And they become pain-free, and then they're more resilient to what they're doing. So, sometimes patients end up with other colleagues of mine, doctors that, will say, well, what makes your knee hurt? Running makes your knee hurt. Okay, well, then don't run. But it's like that to somebody who loves running, who finds that mental release from their run, it's like the thing that they look forward to is like telling them, might as well take depressive tablets then.
Yeah.
That's what they want to be able to do. So we want to try and see how we can keep them doing that. But we need to treat the problem. So that's kind of one of the places. And then we always use the opportunity, I think, to encourage physical activity, whenever we can, because we genuinely believe that is sort of a non-negotiable, actually, in general health.
And this will take me to my next subject, which is longevity. I think when I first met you, this is where our passion about longevity came to be. And I know, you started with sports medicine, and this is something now you're also more and more focused on, and that you're very interested in. So, longevity has become now a mainstream word used by everybody. But I was curious to know for you, what is longevity? And I think, coming from exercise, I think this is one of the top things. But for you per se, what is longevity and why is it important?
It's been a great journey to get to this point for me personally. because it kind of started with a patient of mine, actually, I think, at the beginning of my time in Dubai about 5 years ago. And patient asked me about peptides. What I thought about peptides. And I mean, obviously, there's a lot more known about peptides maybe now. It's become a little bit more, it's entered into maybe not the mainstream, but like certainly into the realms of those talking about longevity. And
GLP-1 is a peptide, actually. That became the most popular one, I would say.
Exactly. Just like insulin is actually a peptide.
Yeah, exactly. Insulin is a peptide.
Peptides have got a very interesting role to play. But I found myself not really being able to answer her question too well. Actually, coming from the sports side, there was a professional sports team that had used peptides for some performance-enhancing stuff, and they had gotten in a little bit of trouble. And that's the only real comment.
So that's like the bad advertising of it, actually.
Yeah, for sure. You got to be sort of, why you're actually using them. But that sort of made me actually want to rather answer a question better. So I started delving into things, and that particular patient I started talking about Ben Greenfield, who then couldn't get enough of Ben's podcast. And I guess that started me down the rabbit hole of, what the term I don't really like to use too much these days is biohacking.
Yes.
I think we got to be careful of these terms, that they sometimes become maybe a little bit annoying. The wellness and the diet and the exercise, they can be a little bit triggering words sometimes, I think. Longevity is also one of those interesting ones, still important, but I think it's health span, I think, is for me the way I like to think about it a little bit more, because it maybe makes you think that it's not necessarily that we're trying to live forever, but that we just want to age well and live to whatever age we're meant to be, but that we're still doing the things that we want to do at that age. So I always think of longevity or health span in terms of what kind of grandfather would I like to be to my grandkids.
Yeah, that's a very nice way of putting it.
It helps a lot, because you start to think...
Because what you do today will affect the kind of grandfather you can be in the future.
You couldn't be more spot on. And you actually have to start it now. Because I always tend to think, and I actually sometimes question patients on this, is like, okay, so let's say you wanted maybe to lift your 6-year-old grandkid up to the Christmas tree so that they could put the star on the top. I don't think people realize how difficult that is, because you think now, I can lift that up and put them on the top of the tree. But when you're 85, that's probably the equivalent of lifting, I don't know, 40 or 50 kilogram weight now above your head and holding it there for a while. It's doable, but it's not so easy.
But it's not something you can in day one do. No. It actually requires training, and
you got to be consistent with that kind of training. You've got to have to do it forever. It's not like a prescription of exercise for a period of time. It's like, this is it from now until the end. In some maybe different way, shape or form. I don't think exercise is or you're always just gonna run, or you're always just going to go to the gym. I think it's nice to adapt things over time. I've certainly adapted things depending on where I've lived. Prior to coming to Dubai, I lived in Durban, so I surfed every day before work. There's nothing quite like surfing. But prior to that, I'd lived in a place that was near a forest, and I mountain biked. And now I live, right close to Al Qudra. So then I swore that I'd never road bike, but I picked up, a road bike.
Now that I've been in health and wellness for almost 3 years, and it was a passion of mine even before. And I think an important message is that it shouldn't be 0 or 100. So it's not that, I'm going to live a sedentary life, not move and eat bad food and not take supplements, or run an ultra marathon and, take 12 supplements and eat very well. And you mentioned biohacking, all these being words that are now being overused, and maybe these words actually make people it makes it even further into something they can achieve, because it's like such a okay, I'm not a biohacker, so I can never be healthy and have a good health span. For you, what do you think are the easy steps people can take from testing or supplementation or even sleep, that is very important, that can be added to your everyday? So what are the tips you can give, for example, that are important and achievable, I would say,
I think I always try to start off by thinking of what the pillars of health are. For me, certainly it doesn't mean that that's, is that's the
Pillar.
way.
Yeah.
But I try and bring it back to sort of about 4 pillars of health, being physical activity, healthy nutrition, sleep and recovery, and mental health, which would tie in then, you know, some meditation and breath work, which would also cross over a little bit with recovery stuff. But if we can try to think of it in terms of those 4 pillars, sleep, mental health, exercise or physical activity, and nutrition, then we can maybe start working out that we perhaps don't have those things in an optimal state. Maybe some do, but often I find that trying to keep those things in balance is probably what we're striving for in life in general. And maybe it's not ever going to really be in balance, and that's fine. But the awareness of the importance of trying to keep those things a little bit in check, I think is where the gold lies. And that makes it simpler for people, because maybe it's like hard if you always like those things must be perfect all the time. So maybe it's never going to be like that. But if you can identify when one of those things is not maybe right, pay a little bit of extra attention there, then maybe one of the other pillars starts to go off a little bit while you're giving that one attention. And then you come back to that one, and you just constantly strive through life to try and see if you can optimize those things. And then, you know, if you go into a little bit more specifics about that, then it's you know, it's a little bit of a minefield out there for people. We certainly know it when it comes to diets, is then it's this diet, and then now that's not the thing anymore, then it's now this one.
I think it makes it, you know, all these diets or different hacks makes the person think that, you know, that's the only way, and it's not personalized to you. And I think something that I've learned through testing, or because we do, let's say, food intolerance tests or genetic testing, actually every person, their body absorbs differently nutrition. So someone might say, okay, you need to do a keto diet, but actually their body doesn't absorb meat well. And you've had the most horrible formula put. So yeah, going back to diet, putting it into like specific, you know, clear diets, I think it's hurtful for the person.
And it can be triggering, I think, as well, speaking about diets. And it becomes almost as controversial as a religious discussion will get sometimes with diet. But I think what you say about testing, and it's really important. It's become something that's super important to me as well. Testing and sort of more precision medicine,
yes,
more unique to the individual, more
personalized
medicine is where medicine is going. There is no stopping it from happening now. It's just the way
it's very exciting times.
It's very exciting. Yeah. It's completely changing the way that medicine will be practiced in the future. Everybody will know what their genomics is. Every medication will be prescribed knowing the pharmacogenomics of that particular individual as to whether they will react well or not so well to that medication. Everything will maybe be cross-referenced with your genomics. There's still lots to learn. It's not saying that it's perfect now, but it's certainly interesting. I've done my genomics a couple of times with different ones, and I think what has been important to see is that it is consistent between whoever it is that
because it is the same person and the same genes.
Exactly.
Yeah, it would be worrisome if it was different.
You don't want to see that one company says you're slow caffeine metabolizer, and another one says you fast, and you're like, But they've all been. So I think just using that one as an example is, I know that I'm a fast caffeine metabolizer, so I know that if I do have my 3:00 in the afternoon coffee, that it's okay for me. But it's people will often say, yeah, but I still sleep fine. I can have coffee after dinner, I can have coffee and I still sleep fine. It's like, okay, well, how do you know? You're like, what are you measuring it? Can you see the differences? What is the quality of your sleep? Are you dreaming like mad that you're not actually getting into deep sleep? Gone are the days where we need to like sort of wonder about it and stab in the dark and just try something and see. We can test for things. So like that's what I love about your guys' company and others that are going this route of being able to test and retest stuff
and see the trend. Basically,
see the trends is exactly what's important. People often will ask about supplements and what supplements should I be on. It's like, well, I don't know. Like, we need to talk about your diet. We need to see perhaps where there might be deficits. It would be nice to know what your genetics says about you as to whether you need a little bit more iodine or selenium in your diet.
So it's really personalized to the person.
Super personalized.
We actually have an expression in Valeo, we call it like don't be a supplements guru, meaning, don't just follow. If somebody tells you should take this supplement, I take it, it's good for me, you should take it. Actually, no. I mean, is it really good for you? Is it based on your data, on your nutrition, on your lifestyle?
Exactly.
I think that is definitely key.
Vitamin D is like one of those ones, that's quite topical, and people like to say, we need a little bit, I need vitamin D.
Yeah.
It's like, well, how do you know? Like, what is have you checked your level before you take vitamin D? Check it. And then, yes, there are a lot of people that are deficient in vitamin D.
Yeah.
That is true.
But I would imagine if you're somebody who runs a marathon, every morning you're under the sun, your levels will be higher than someone who's in the office all day.
Do you know,
naturally,
it's
right?
quite interesting, actually.
No,
we've
not.
done some tests on some professional golfers and that before, who spend a lot of time outside in the sun, and actually find them in the deficient range.
Oh, great.
And so it does vary a little bit with skin color and with other factors that perhaps, and sometimes we don't realize actually how much we're indoors, that it is actually vitamin D is a little bit off. So I would advise people actually check what their vitamin, because vitamin D is involved in a lot of different pathways.
Yes.
So too is magnesium, but they all tests that can be, now with what you guys have been doing, I think it's always been quite hard for patients to be able to get tests done, and sometimes the costs have been a bit exorbitant, and you've got to go through somebody to get access to the results. I think making lab tests and other testing more available to people is certainly the way forward, because then they can test, they can check it, they can then take the supplement as they need, and then they can recheck to make sure that supplement's working for them. Now we're on the right track.
Yeah.
It's the same applies to anything.
I mean, if you think about it, your car, you enter it, you can see, all the measurements, you can see the fuel level, you can see how fast you've gone, you can see if it needs anything else. I'm not I'm sure, someone would know every bit to it, but you have actually a dashboard that tells you. And, when we created Valeo, it was like, okay, why can't somebody know their own dashboard? And actually your blood data, number one, of course, there's urine, you can take stool, there's so much more you can find out. Is your dashboard, is your data. So why don't you get to know it? Why is it so hard to get to know it? And this is how, the Valeo, results came to be, because now you understand, okay, these are my levels. I made these changes. Now these are my levels, and the trend went up or down, and it can go down. Actually, you mentioned mental health, and, I'll take a small parenthesis here is, for example, I was checking my sugar levels, HbA1c, and I stopped for 3 months, I stopped any type of sugar. Fruits, even like I would read labels, no fructose, no desserts, of course. But I had also a very stressful 3 months where I was, we had just launched Valeo. Actually, I don't know why I decided to stop sugar when I launched Valeo, and it was a very stressful 3 months. And my sugar levels actually went up in these 3 months, even though I did not eat any sugar. And I realized how, as you mentioned, you have those 4 pillars: nutrition, mental health, recovery, and sleep. So these 4 pillars, let's say if you do nutrition perfectly, you eat very clean, but your mental health is, extremely poor, your body will actually tell you that through the data and say, look, one of your pillars is off. Even though you stopped sugar, it went up. So I thought that was like very interesting that we have this, your body actually communicates with you through the wearables, for example, from the Oura Ring, Ultra Human, all the others, to your blood data. And the genetic one, as you mentioned before, is the one that actually tells you your foundation. As a foundation, this is what you can eat. This is what medicine, if you take it, you can absorb it. And I guess this is when it comes to going to optimal, being your optimal self. And for you, for example, I was wondering, you mentioned recovery being, one of the pillars. How important is recovery, including sleep? Especially, for example, if we talk about athletes or active people, or is it only very important for active people, or is it important for everybody? These are I always wonder about it.
Is an excellent question. So in sport, we generally say that recovery is as important as the training
Okay,
in
very
overall
nice.
performance. Your body needs that time to recover so that you can go again the next training session. And
So like an athlete organizes his or her recovery as much as his or her exercise.
100%.
Oh, wow.
It's like written in on the weekly schedule.
Oh, wow.
It's like scheduled in there
Okay.
daily. And the same applies for us. The most important way for me, I think about recovery, and this is where wearables do become handy in just giving you a little bit more data. As we know, data is really key these days. Is in your recovery with regard to your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous system, so your heart rate variability. So that being able to know what your heart rate variability score is very helpful, because then you can measure your daily heart rate variability against itself, what your normal value is. So this is how sometimes we'll explain it to patients, is that if your heart rate variability, let's say yours is 40, and we'll just take a nice one.
And each one has a different base in a way, right? Okay.
Exactly. And it's just the difference between your heartbeats. They're not exactly the same, although it might sound the same, but there's little millisecond differences between each beat. And that will be measured over time, and then that will be given your heart rate variability in milliseconds. If it's above your normal number, then you are recovered. You in the parasympathetic nervous system state.
Okay.
If it's under that, then you're still in sympathetic over. You still got your foot on the pedal. You're not recovered yet. So this is, I think, sometimes the problem, and sometimes a little bit of the basis of illness, is that we've got our foot on the pedal all the time now.
Exactly.
We work, stress, meetings, calls, kids, traffic, home, TV, noise, sound, WhatsApp, computer screens, and then fall over in bed and maybe not have the best night's sleep and wake up and do it all over again and again and again. So when you talk about recovery, it's critical for health. It's identifying, first of all, if something's off. And again, that's where wearables become handy, is because you can see the trends and you know what your normal is. So if you detect something off, then you can maybe try and implement some stuff and check that it's fine, because there's nothing like a change in heart rate variability to give you a sign that maybe you're heading towards, in athletes, an injury, or in people, illness.
I was reading an article, is that how some people actually caught during the COVID times, caught that they were positive COVID because their heart rate variability was off a bit, and it was actually a sign to show that they were going to be COVID positive. And I find that super interesting, because actually, again, your body talks to you through data and tells you, look, I'm not good. You look at your heartbeat, and then you adjust from there. In terms of,
it's self-quantifying,
yeah,
right? It's like exactly how you said with the car when you get in, and the computers these days in your dashboard. It's the same with us. We should know. So we should have genomics as a base.
Yeah.
We got to know what your uphill and downhill challenges are. Most people think, well, that's your genetics, that's set. You can't change that. It's not like that. It's genomics is showing us that there are just inherent challenges. You can switch on and switch off certain genes based on your epigenetics, based on your lifestyle.
So I want to take a little break here. Just to explain a bit what is genomics, I think for somebody who doesn't know, and this is actually why longevity actually became more mainstream, more key, because we can calculate, or find what is our genomics. But if you can give it like a short definition about what it is, and then what epigenetics is.
I like to think of genomics as numbers. So if you compare it to computers, would be zeros and ones.
Okay.
And you put zeros and ones in a certain sequence, and that provides a picture of some sort, or codes for a certain program.
Yes.
Our genomics, our genes, are on our DNA, and they all come down to nucleotides, which are little base pairs, so between 4 little numbers, A, G, C, and T. And that's it for numbers, not numbers, letters.
Yeah.
And those letters will be in a specific sequence, or in a different, they pair with each other, and on particular parts of the gene, they will normally be in a certain format, and sometimes there'll just be a little difference. It'll be a T there instead of a C. And that will give a subtle difference to somebody. It might be the difference between being a fast or a slow caffeine metabolizer, or metabolizing folate a little bit differently to somebody else.
So it's like a bit like your coding structure.
It's your coding. So that codes for a protein, and that protein has an effect on the body. So if you don't code that particular protein, or there's a stop in that particular thing, or a slight variation in it, we're not really talking about mutations or deletions in genes. It's just little coding differences. Then it might not make that particular protein, and then that particular effect might not be experienced in the body. So being aware of that helps you then, and that's where we bring in epigenetics.
Yes.
Is that we can still, through various lifestyle choices, recoveries, sleep, certain dietary choices, certain supplementation, be able to switch on, upregulate those genes, or switch certain ones off that maybe have detrimental effects. And that's where the gold lies. And it's been incredibly difficult over the years to find exactly which part on the gene, with which little SNP, we call it single nucleotide polymorphisms, will mean what thing. And we're starting to get closer and closer to figuring that stuff out. So there's a lot now that we're able to sort of work out, and you can test your muscle strength and your endurance capacities and your injury risks and a lot of stuff. There's still a lot more data that needs to be done, a lot more cross-referencing of things to make sure that it is for sure. But there are certain ones now that we're pretty confident with, and many more that are starting to be
But we are on the right track. I think
100%.
I think for me, when I first found out about epigenetics, and it was just before Valeo, and one of the reasons why Valeo came to be was you felt like there is something under your control. Like you can actually control this is it either trigger it or not trigger it. And funnily enough, at the end, you always come back to the foundation, be it recovery, sleep, nutrition, exercise. Actually, even if you go scientifically in advanced, epigenetics process, you go back to the basics. The basics are actually the most important for you to affect or impact your epigenetics. So it's not that only an athlete or somebody who's extremely active can impact them. Us, everyday active people, can also impact it.
That's exactly right. And I think sometimes it's important to think, for athletes, they're looking for 1% difference. They're looking for that little subtle difference that will help them with their performance to win.
Because seconds count.
Seconds count.
Yeah.
Milliseconds count if you talk about Formula One, which is one of my fascinations. But But for normal people, and I say normal in, you know what I mean.
Yes.
People,
not
all of us.
athletes.
Yeah, not super
non-athletes.
elite athletes, non-elite athletes.
Yeah.
People that, we talk about physical activity, we talk about nutrition, we talk about sleep, and we talk about recovery. That gets pretty much done for athletes, and it's scheduled into their week, and they've got time to do that, and they've got all the experts telling them exactly what they need to do, and then they're able to look for that 1% difference on top. I do like to think we do try and take a lot of examples from experience in elite sport and filter that down into us more non-elite athletes, like the same as Formula One does with the normal car industries. You test things out there, all the technology filters its way down. So I like to try and employ some of the stuff that we see with athletes, and then it finds a way. Heart rate variability stuff we were doing with athletes a long time ago, and then it finds its way into the
which is the
public
beauty
domain,
of it, right? So now it's available for everybody. And this comes to my last question. Actually, two last, if they let me have one more. My last question is about, let's say, for everybody, what would you say is the most important daily or weekly exercise routine? What are the movements that are extremely important that every human should put it in their routine?
Something.
Yeah, something they will want to do over and over.
Do is the key.
Yeah.
The more they enjoy doing what they do, the more sustainable it will be, and the more they'll start to derive the benefits of this word we call exercise or physical activity. So when I sit with patients, and because I think a lot of doctors are a little bit pushed for time, and maybe they mention the word exercise at the end of the consultation, that you should exercise.
Yeah.
And then, but there's no, it's like telling someone to go to the pharmacy.
Oh, but I never have time to,
Yeah.
you know, that's the,
Take
I
this
never have
supplement.
time.
But then it's like, how much and when and for how long must I do that thing for? And time is always the problem for most people. Time is a factor, but it can't be the predominant thing. You have to be able to work around it. So I mean, we touched on this half Ironman situation that I have to deal with next week in Mallorca, but to be able to find time with, 2 small kids and my wife, and wanting to have dinner with her and a glass of wine at the end of the day, and cuddle in the bed with the kids in the morning, and try and fit in that kind of length of time of exercise is difficult to do. It keeps me honest. It's something I'm training towards. So I'll sit with patients. So like I was saying, doctors may mention the word exercise, that you should do it, but I'll sit with patients for sometimes half an hour, 45 minutes, and go through the specifics. And we'll try and work out something that's close to where they live. We'll look at, what maybe they might enjoy doing and maybe they have never thought about actually doing before. Maybe didn't think about dancing or, dragon boat racing or something different. We all tend to think we have to go run or we have to go cycle or something. But find some form of physical activity that you're happy with doing for at least 30 minutes every day, with maybe a recovery day in there, but even like a more active recovery day, like a nice yoga session or just a nice walking the dogs or something. But to be trying to be physically active for most days of the week for at least 30 minutes a day of some form of moderate intensity exercise is what we try and achieve. But again, just coming back to just saying, do something. Just
something,
move.
exactly.
In fact, I like using move
more. I like that word
exercise.
Too. And I realized the only way I was able to add exercise to my everyday was the same way as you said. I said, okay, I need to move. So let's say I will take the stairs in our office building, or I will take a call and move around, do the tour of the building. At least I say I moved, because that day I didn't have time to go an hour to the gym and do weights, for example, but I know I moved. So what's your checklist? For example, my sister loves belly dancing. I mean, if you put me in a belly dancing class, it will be a disaster. But for her, that's the move she likes. For you, is doing a half Ironman, that is not for everybody. But as my last of the last questions, we were discussing before about, ultra marathons or endurance sports. And you have an Ironman next week, half Ironman that you're doing. So I always wondered, first, the why. Like, what's the purpose behind people? For example, I climbing, I know my why. For ultra marathons or endurance, what is the why? And is it actually healthy? Because I was reading, how like a young man or a woman dropped dead in the middle of a marathon and passed away. So is it actually healthy for the body doing ultra sports?
For me, what I've found with endurance sports is that, and my genomics, funny enough, tell me that I'm not so well adapted to endurance sport.
Really? Okay.
Is that I generally go through a bit of a dark place at some point in the race, for large portions of the race actually, which has tended to make me not so scared of going to those dark places anymore. Have a little bit of healthy fear going into them, but I've come out the other side most of the time a little bit stronger, maybe
Very
mentally,
nice.
and maybe a little bit physically as well. Just pushing those boundaries a little bit out for me personally has become important. It forces me out of my comfort zone a little bit. I think sometimes maybe we tend to operate, we don't actually realize maybe how strong we all are until we are tested. I
completely agree, yeah.
And so I like to just test myself sometimes, just to
So when you say a dark place, or because now I compare it to climbing, and definitely when you're climbing, you enter this dark place and you're climbing by, you're by yourself, you're in a team, but you're one step in, one step out, one step, what is that dark place and how's the feeling when you come out of it?
makes that finish line just all that more
Yeah.
special, because you kind of had to, didn't just come easy for you, didn't just race and everything was, you dealing with maybe adverse weather conditions, you're dealing with adversity, I guess, in some shape or form, and you came through it. And many people are doing that all the time. You know, they might have illnesses in families and adverse things that are not great, and you tend to find the strength deep inside that you never knew you really had. So for me, I cramp a lot, so like I almost can't use my limbs anymore. I've got to figure out ways of how I'm gonna, when the quadriceps,
You need to hydrate well.
you would think the sports doctor would know that, right?
You need the electrolytes.
I've tried everything, and funny enough, I think does actually come down to the genomics in a way. I didn't have these certain muscle fibers. The contractibility of my muscle fibers are not great, so they get overused. And but there will be a cramping, there will be physical pain, and there will be sometimes maybe adverse weather conditions or a punctured tire or something that doesn't go according to plan, and
which is
life.
Yeah,
and you've got to
exactly.
figure that thing out and get through to the other side. And when that sun's shining on the other side, there you just have a deep sense of satisfaction, I guess,
and achievement. Yeah,
and just a little bit, but maybe harder to kill.
Yeah. But I think, to close on a note of what you said, and I think what I realize also from climbing is our bodies are much more stronger than we think they are. Our bodies and minds, actually. And our mind affects our bodies or impacts our body much more than what we think. So maybe as a message, we would say like, believe in your body and its strength, and, work on recovery, but also exercise. And if you're somebody who hasn't moved for a long time, actually take the first step, to move, basically.
That's a perfect way, I think, to wrap up. You summed it up perfectly.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Allen.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.